Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Managing Editor James Kleimann to talk about what happened with Surefire CRM earlier this week and the judge's latest ruling on the Real Estate Commission settlements. James, welcome back to the podcast.
I'm good to be back. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So much news going on. Love to have you on, and you can give our audience a flavor of all the things that the newsroom is reporting on. The first thing I wanted to touch on was the story that you wrote. You reported and wrote out about the Surefire incident that happened through ICE. What was it, Monday? Or I know you wrote about it yesterday, but tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting one. So normally Surefire CRM, this is one of the biggest CRMs out there in mortgage. They have a weekly update that loan officers can send out to their contact list. So typically it's realtor partners or business partners or past clients. And it's a little video, and it's called Markets in a Minute. And these go out every week, and they have been for quite some time. Only on Monday, it didn't quite go as it should have gone. And what I mean by that is there was an issue on the back end at ICE, which is the current owner of Surefire CRM. And this Markets in a Minute message goes out to more than 600,000 email addresses and numbers via text. And what was interesting about this one is that the video contained a hyperlink, as it normally does. And there was information on the bottom as well that all referred back to a single loan officer in the state of New Jersey who was quite surprised that his contact list of, 20-something thousand people ended up somehow getting distributed to more than 600,000 addresses. And suffice it to say, this was problematic for a couple reasons. So the first being, this loan officer in New Jersey is like, wait a second, I'm getting all these crazy messages, and all these other loan officers are angry because what it looks like is that, let's say I'm just an everyday loan officer at Loan Depot or Fairway or any number of lenders in the country, right? And I had at any point in time, I think, been a client, or the lender that I'd worked with had been a client of Surefire. It would appear that my contacts information was still in, and so my contacts would be receiving an email from my address, right? And it would say, Markets in a Minute. And then if my realtor partners or past clients were to click on the links, they would be directed to this random loan officer in New Jersey, right? And it has his NMLS information on it, and there's nothing, sensitive. There's no sensitive privacy data or anything like that in there. However, I think there were a lot of people who were like, wait a second, I'm a random LO in California. Who's this guy in New Jersey, that is messaging my realtor contacts and my past clients in California? What's going on? It just so happens that this guy's name and information, contact information, is all contained on this email. And so I'm gonna let him know what I think about this. And so this guy in New Jersey gets all these pretty angry messages, saying, what are you doing? Like, why are you, messing with my sphere? And so it takes a little while, but ICE manages to shut down they dead link basically the video hyperlinks and all of the information that would have been sent over to this guy's marketing. But at that point, you can't unsend something, right? Like, I've been there where I've accidentally sent an email and it goes out to 100,000 people, and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? It'll ruin your day. So imagine if you have nothing to do with this and it's a technical or human error. Whichever, we don't exactly know at this stage how it happened, but it was on the back end of ICE's system that this ends up getting distributed. My guess would be that it was, pretty much every contact that they had in there. It was like the master list, so to speak, and that it just got blasted to, people all over the country, and it contains this guy's marketing information. And so, yeah, problematic, right? So ICE did manage to solved the problem. They knocked a few systems offline that day. Pretty much everything was back up and running on Tuesday, but you have a lot of questions now, I think, that are related to safeguarding of data. What happens when your company terminates an agreement with an existing vendor? Maybe you move on to a different CRM. Do they maintain that list? Do they maintain all of the emails that you would have been distributing out to had you still been contracted with them? So there are just a lot of questions that I think you don't typically see too often in the kind of the general mortgage world being discussed openly. And I think what's also interesting about this is ICE obviously acquired Black Knight for $11.8 billion back, last year. And as a condition, they did have to make commitments to safeguarding data. They have a monitor for the course of 10 years that's supposed to check in on them if they're to make an acquisition, right? Like there were a lot of concerns, a lot of fears, I think, from the FTC. And certainly there were some outspoken people in the mortgage world who said, this is already a very powerful company. Should they have an even bigger piece of the technology pie? They already have so much. Is this healthy for us? And, I think those are different concerns that were I think, displayed here with this incident on Monday. But it does speak to the larger question in the industry as to how big, how powerful should these vendors be? What is my responsibility if someone makes a mistake and they're a multinational corporation that has billions of dollars, and like what can be done, what should be done? Technically speaking, in some states, the way it works is if you're an LO and a vendor makes a mistake, you are responsible. It is not that vendor's problem. The agreement, the law says you need to rectify it. So does that mean, ICE has to come in and indemnify you or any vendor when there is a mistake? But yeah, a lot of issues I think now have surfaced because it is probably the biggest, most public mistake I think I've seen in the vendor space in quite some time, outside of like a major hack or something where there are obvious bad actors. And while that is technically possible here, all of the information that I have heard suggests it was a simple human error at Surefire CRM.
So something very different than, say, like, the Loan Depot breach that, brought that down for like a week or 10 days or something like this. Very, very different. As you said, there's no like personal identification. It's not like sensitive information got shared. It's more of like, how did this happen? And it just points out, like you said, I mean, there's the human error or the technical error caused by the human, right? Whatever it is like there is that risk in vendor management that's very real for all these lenders because they are on the dime for whatever their vendors do.
Yeah, and so now you have a lot of legal questions that I think certainly the LO New Jersey is going to have to deal with over the next couple days, couple weeks, who knows how long. But I do wonder, I've seen some of the agreements that ICE and other vendors have signed with lenders, and they generally do it by seat, right? So it's not like an individual loan officer is signing a deal with Surefire or Total Expert, or you name the CRM, you name the company. It's typically a lender has the contract, right, and not an individual. And so when you look at the contracts, I mean, they're basically these blanket messages that say like anything that goes wrong, it's on you. And so, but like, what do? Do you not have a CRM? Like, what are your options if you're a lender? You're not going to build the CRM in-house, right? And especially when you consider how many of these companies have kind of connected ecosystems for their, CRM. You have other tools that loan originators and other mortgage professionals use to do their jobs effectively. And they're supposed to talk to one another. They're supposed to be more efficient. It's supposed to save you money, theoretically, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I just don't know what option you have if you are a loan officer and something outside of your control happens, but it's your name on it. It's your responsibility, technically speaking, to make sure that you're not blasting unsolicited messages at consumers or, vendors, people who haven't been agreed to receive all of these messages. So it's a complicated series of issues, and I don't think it's going to get resolved anytime soon. But certainly something that we're going to, I think, probably hear a lot more of. And it's not like, just to put it out there, this incident that happened on Monday, this is not the only thing that has ever happened in the CRM space. There are others. I spoke on background and off the record to other folks in the mortgage tech, mortgage vendor space, and they say, look, mistakes do happen. This is not by any stretch of the imagination rare. I mean, I wouldn't say that it happens often, but it happens enough where pretty much every company has had an oopsie like this. Now, having spoken to a lot of the lenders that have loan officers who were surprised to find that they had sent out a message through the system that they had no idea even occurred, right? Now they have to communicate to their clients, to their partners, to their people. And what do they say? Like, and there hasn't been a tremendous amount of communication from ICE to some of these lenders, at least the ones that I spoke to. So, yeah, I think a lot of people really define service with the vendor on not when everything goes right and perfectly, but when things don't go right, and how do you manage situations responsibly, quickly, effectively? How much information can you share? It's obviously more complicated the bigger you are, right? And ICE is going to have to think about larger compliance concerns and legal issues and potential. I have no firsthand information that there are going to be any class action lawsuits that are as a result of it, but certainly if you are a large company and an errant series of emails do get sent out, there are probably some lawyers out there who smell money, right? And so you have to think about that. And so the bigger you are, sometimes the more difficult it is for you to move very quickly and, communicate to the clients, the lenders, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what happened. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how we prevent it from going forward. Here's where your data is. Here's what happens if you leave the company. What happens to your data, stuff like that.
So funny because when we were at the gathering, and even before that, just talking to people, talking to different companies, lenders especially, it points to sometimes this is why innovation is really difficult in our industry, is because the stakes are so high, right? I mean, you have regulatory things around all of these things. We've talked to different lenders who are very interested in leveraging some AI, but they're like, we do not want to be the first people. We do not want to say, CFPB, come look at us. We're doing this. And CFPB really hasn't, identified what the consumer harms might be or not, or how you protect consumers with all of the things that AI can do. So I do think it just points out to your point that the bigger you are, you have a lot more at stake. And those are the people that we would expect in some ways to have the resources to be doing the innovation. We see that some of these really big companies. But yeah, there's always this possibility, and great reporting on that. There was a lot of private talks in Facebook groups and all these other things. You had to find a lot of people who wanted to give you information. So really,
yeah, and I think it's worth noting, Sarah, that a lot of people did want to talk to me, but very, very few people wanted to talk to me and put their name on it. And I think that does speak to the larger concern that there are a few big players in the mortgage vendor space that have a lot of power. And, I've never heard of ICE doing anything to, stomp on the little guy or be punitive because someone is unhappy with an element of service. But certainly there is a feeling from the people that I spoke to on background that it wasn't worth the risk, that they control so much of the mortgage ecosystem and technology that to speak out just didn't seem wise, right? Because, okay, let's say you do get a different CRM, you're probably going to run into their product somewhere down the line in some facet, right? Unless you want to do kind of a piecemeal approach and work with different vendors. So there is certainly among the people that I spoke to a fear that this is a huge, huge company with a lot of power, and they could make it pretty difficult for you if they wanted to. And again, I don't have any reporting that suggests they have made it difficult for people who didn't want to, work with them in one capacity but did in another. But certainly it is a fear among the people that I spoke with.
Interesting insight there. So the next story I wanted to talk about, I spoke with Brooklyn Hahn earlier this week. She gave us a really great rundown and update on everything that's happening with the commission lawsuits. But as she and I noted in that podcast, things change daily. And I think we had some more very recent information since I even talked to her about the settlements. So can you bring us up to date there?
Yeah. So after months of uncertainty, the industry is, I think, a small cause to celebrate. And the reason is because Judge Stephen Bowe has granted final approval to the commission lawsuit settlement agreement reached by Anywhere, Remax, and Keller Williams. This is breaking news, hot off the presses. Brooklyn just broke this story. And so as a part of their settlement agreements, Anywhere, Remax, Keller Williams, they have agreed to pay, I think it's $83.5 million, $55 million, and $70 million respectively. And they've also agreed to enact various policy changes, including provisions that they no longer require members to be members of NAR. They don't have to follow NAR's Code of Ethics or the MLS Handbook. And they're also going to ensure that agents make it clear to clients that commissions are always negotiable, that agents have the freedom to set or negotiate commissions as they see fit, and that agents are not required to make offers of compensation or accept offers of compensation from cooperating brokers. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't entirely a smooth ride. There were about 60 class members who filed objections to the settlements with the court, and there were roughly 27 million email notices, about 10 million plus postcard notices that got sent out. And to date, as far as we can tell, almost 200,000 claims have already been filed, and 61 class members have opted out of the settlement. So there are things happening. This is already, we're starting to get to the stage where there's some money actually changing hands. Of course, the attorneys are going to be, I think, the happiest when all is said and done here. They're typically going to get about a third of all the winnings, I should say. Winnings is not the right term, but of the judgment, the collective judgments. And so we're talking like a couple $100 million here, right? When you add it all together, I think it's like somewhere around the range of like 900 million. And we're not totally done with all the settlements, right? There are still some companies that are still negotiating, just smaller ones on the radar, because I think pretty much every big player has already struck an agreement. The biggest being, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of America, which, they're spending $250 million to make this go away. And it's quite a bit higher than the others, but they were also the only large brokerage that didn't settle when NAR and some of the others had previously made some moves. And so, you pay sort of a little extra, right? Sort of a tax for being the last man standing at the other end of the dais. So it's all coming to a head. We also reported yesterday that some buyer side plaintiffs in other cases had tried to stop these settlements. That did not happen. It seems like everybody who's ever bought or sold a house has been a victim. So we're going to see how that goes in the course of time. But I mean, yeah, this is the big one. I think the next thing that's in play here, now that the settlements have been almost entirely approved, at least on the sell side, is what happens with the DOJ. They did not, as far as we could tell, unless there was a last minute filing that hasn't hit our systems yet. They did not file, an additional statement with the court, but we do know that they have license to resume investigations into NAR, investigations into other brokerages they feel may be colluding or conspiring or maintaining commission practices that, don't fit their version of antitrust law. So I think that there will be something. Will it be before August, late August, when these settlement agreements are set to be officially put in place by the brokerages under NAR's new guidelines? We just don't know that. The DOJ is typically not loose-lipped, but that's going to be the next thing to watch for.
That's the next thing to watch for. It just still, I'm not in the industry, right? We cover the industry. It's just hard for me to see how consumers benefit from that judgment from these things being paid out. I guess, be interesting to see, what do consumers get? What does your average consumer get from these settlements?
I think your average consumer probably gets a lot more transparency about how it's done. We know that NAR and all the brokerages have talked until they were blue in the face, saying commissions have always been negotiable, and we've never said otherwise. But if you ask the average consumer, I don't think that they would have the same consensus that the brokerages and NAR did. So there's going to be a lot more information that the consumer theoretically could be aware of, and that could push commissions down to some degree. I don't think it's going to be as extreme as some of the folks that the New York Times has spoken to, or some of the professors of colleges who think that we're going to see, 30, 40, $50 billion in commission revenue dry up. But I do think they're probably going to get pushed down over time. I do think that we're going to see a lot of those agents who are kind of at the margins, not really full-time professionals, probably just not going to be renewing. And the other big thing to think about here, Sarah, is we know that the dues for NAR have been frozen for this year. They're not going to be changing. But what about next year? NAR, even after 400, I think they got off pretty light, all things considered. But they still have 400 something million dollars to make up. And so I would be surprised if dues did not go up next year by a pretty healthy margin. And how many agents are looking at this thinking, okay, I want to be a part of my state association, maybe 2 states, right? Like if you're in a region that is Oklahoma and Texas, right? Like you want to have both licenses, you want to be a member of multiple MLSs in most cases. It's probably more than $1,000, probably more than $1,500 when you add all of it together, depending on where you are. And is that going to be worth it if you also have to be finding buyers and getting them to sign agreements from the jump? Like, it's going to be situational. So I think there are going to be a lot of agents who just do it as a hobby or do it part-time, a little, hustle cash, that just aren't going to do it. And that will probably bring down commissions to a degree. We don't know if there are going to be new entrants who are going to pioneer new models, maybe hourly models, although you can't really do 1099s at that point. But there are a lot of different scenarios, I think, that could emerge over time. And I think the good agents who really provide legit value, and people on the sell side, they might even be able to put their commissions higher than they have been, because they're going to be eating up more market share. And they can prove, because they have lots of referrals, right? They have lots of people who say, yeah, James is the best, or Sarah is the best, and he or she was worth, whatever it is we paid, 3%, 3 point, whatever, 2 point, depends on the market, depends on the conditions. And, there are just fewer homes for sale right now in the existing home space. And if you want to sell it, you want to do it right, you think you can get top dollar, you probably find someone who you think can negotiate, who can fit a couple different offers against one another, right? Who's a strategist, someone a little bit smarter than the average cookie. So that's my own, take on this. But I think overall we're going to see some compression over the course of time, but nothing in the first year or two.
Yeah, and I think when we were at the gathering and we talked to a lot of people on the real estate side, many of them, even from stage, were like, yeah, we're getting the hobbyists out of this profession. That's not a bad thing, right? Like, let's get to the fact that, you and I have talked a lot about, your Aunt Betty or whatever, who is just doing this on the side. And, even in this housing market, we just had news this week about how much home prices have gone up. 93% of metros now saw a home price increase. It's still a really tough market in some places. And so the more experienced you are, the better for the consumer, I think.
Yeah, and look, like, professionalizing real estate is not a bad thing. I would much rather have, 1 million Linda O's out there than I would, somebody who just finished up their job as a server at the local Red Lobster before bankruptcy and decided to try their hand at real estate. And just, again, like, no offense, I think there are legitimate questions as to, do you want a super high barrier of entry, and then you end up getting a lot of the same old faces, and you don't see innovation, you don't see new practices emerge. Again, there are like really healthy reasons to want some new blood in the system, but I think the consumer overall is better served by real professionals. And we've seen that NAR and others have, I think, worked to keep a very, very big very, very big tent. And maybe it's been too big, and maybe it should be a lot smaller, and maybe 750,000 really, really good agents who can deliver service and are going to be working with both buyers and sellers. And, we don't see too much dual agency where consumers are harmed or sub-agency in some cases, right? Like there are a lot of different ways it could go bad. There are a lot of ways it could go really well as well. And so we have a litigious society. We need professionals, I think, in this space. The question is, how much should they make? Because right now, if you look at the way commissions have worked, really, it's tied to the equity, right? It's tied to the value of the home. That doesn't mean that the job from an agent, like the agents aren't so much better than they were in 1986 when I was born. It's just the home values have quadrupled, if not more, since then. Should they be entitled to 3% of $800,000, even if the process is largely the same, just because the housing market is better? I think that's a legitimate question to ask, but what is fair is going to depend on what you think as a consumer is fair, and what the agent thinks they're worth, and what they should be able to do. And that's the market economy that ideally we all would like.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. I'm still like trying to process the fact that you were born in 1986.
A lot of people think that's old these days.
Do they? Okay.
They do.
Well, then I will not tell them when I was born, since I remember 1986 very well, since I was in college. So, always funny. James, thanks so much for being on today. And, as always, appreciate the work that your newsroom is doing. And we will have you on again soon.
Cool. Thanks so much, Sarah.